Go Vegan Scotland is a grassroots, volunteer-led group that promotes veganism in Scotland. And we do this through positive advocacy, education, and information sharing. It's really worth saying that there is no big organisation behind us. We have no salaries, no expense budgets. We're all volunteers, volunteering our own time. And fundamental to our message is presenting veganism as an issue of justice for animals, not merely a diet or a personal lifestyle choice, but we consider being vegan to be a moral imperative. So why do we think that proactively advocating for veganism is necessary? Well, firstly, because we believe that the best thing that any one person can do for animals is to be vegan, as going vegan cuts out all animal use insofar as it's possible. And secondly, because anyone can be vegan. It's something that anyone can do effectively in an instant once they make the decision to change and then continue to live by that decision. And that's one great thing about it. We don't need anyone else to do anything. It's not dependent on government or large organizations. It's something that we all have the autonomy to do individually. And thirdly, because once you go vegan, you realize that you should have done it ages ago, and that being vegan is actually the least you can do for animals. It's a neutral position from a moral perspective. And if someone had explained to you that it was the right thing to do, and had shown you just how easy it is to live vegan, you would have done it much, much sooner. And that's what Go Vegan Scotland is all about, really. It's about helping people find veganism, find the relevant information more quickly through our positive advocacy and education. Because it really is possible to create a massive change for animals. The Vegan Society survey of last year concluded that there were over 500,000 vegans living in the UK. So we know that if each one of those vegans turned just one more person vegan every year, and then those that went vegan convinced someone else to go vegan the next year, we could have a vegan UK in as little as 7 years. So seismic change in the very near future really is possible. Now, the unfortunate reality of the current situation is that not all vegans are either able or willing to advocate. Many live vegan quietly, and not every one of them is going to be out there convincing another person to go vegan every year. So we believe that those of us who can, who are willing and able to advocate, just have to do that bit more. And if we work hard, and if we work together, then we can easily make up that difference. We've probably all witnessed the domino effect in our own lives, whereby leading by example, living vegan, talking to friends and family, leads them to make the connection as well. So what we're doing at GVS is we're trying to extend that domino effect out further, beyond our immediate circle of family and friends, to do our bit to turn Scotland vegan more quickly. In our advocacy, we take a clear, justice-based approach to animal rights, and that means that we talk to people about the fact that it's wrong to use animals because they're sentient beings who feel and who want to live free of harm, and it follows logically from that that we shouldn't be paying people to exploit them for us. It's a very straightforward position, and it offers a clear and consistent approach that everyone can understand. And people will argue against it because they don't want to believe that they've been buying into something that's wrong. They don't like the thought of having to change their own lifestyle after they've had years, maybe decades, of unrelenting marketing, tradition, and habit conditioning them to think that what they're doing is okay. But whether or not someone does get defensive when you first put it to them, it's such a clear and logical position that it's actually impossible to dismiss. We absolutely believe that if you think animals matter morally, at all, then you should be vegan. And it really is that simple. In taking our approach, we've learned from a number of sources. In particular, Gary Francione, founder of the abolitionist approach to animal rights, as well as the website howigovegan.com, also the online magazine Ecorazzi, and more recently, psychologist Casey Taft and his book, Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy. And all these sources share our view that as a matter of fundamental morality, we can't exploit animals under any circumstances. We believe that this approach gets to the root of the issue in that it puts animals at the core where they should be. And we also believe that it's very inclusive and it offers a way that we can all advocate for veganism in Scotland. And in practicing our approach, we are principled and unapologetic. We're not shy about using the word vegan at all. We actually see that as being completely necessary. And we aim to always remain encouraging, positive, and friendly, both online and off. We find that a lot of vegans shy away from speaking about the issues in a clear way like this. And perhaps it's because they don't yet have it clear in their own minds that not exploiting animals is actually a matter of morality, rather than a personal lifestyle choice. But it's also not surprising that people shy away from speaking about the issues in this clear way when we think of what we're met with when we do that. Accusations of being militant, or aggressive, or extreme, or lacking a sense of humour. And what's troubling is that these accusations are used as much by people who self-identify as vegan as they are by non-vegans. And while no one wants to be that vegan stereotype, and we certainly don't want people thinking that we're humorless or we're pious, that's actually what those accusations rely on. They're designed to silence us. What we have to remember is that we're all at the forefront of this issue. Thankfully, in this country, it's now much rarer for accusations of arrogance or extremism to be hurled at people who speak out against other forms of unjust discrimination, like sexism, or racism, or homophobia, or transphobia. But veganism is seen as different because it's about animals. And what we'll have to remember is that that is symptomatic of the deeply speciesistic society that we live in. And we have to remind ourselves of that and carry on in a clear and a consistent way. Some things that we don't do in our advocacy: we don't vilify or condemn individuals or groups. We don't victimize, harass, or bully. We don't target specific businesses, and we don't single out specific groups or practices. You see a lot of ridicule online. Vegans ridiculing non-vegans, calling them idiots, making out that vegans are superior to them, trying to make fools of non-vegans, and it's not at all helpful. If you have a strong, coherent position, you don't need to resort to personal insults. When we have logic, reason, and morality, and justice on our side, we don't need to resort to name-calling, victimization, or bullying, and we shouldn't undermine the strength of our own position by engaging in things like that. And it's also not at all accurate. We certainly don't think of our non-vegan family and friends as being stupid, or selfish, or evil. We think of them as what we were like before we went vegan, because the majority of us weren't born vegan. Most of us spent a good period of time as independent, thinking adults, as non-vegans. And we know that we weren't evil, or selfish, or idiots. We don't promote confusing messages, such as baby steps to going vegan, supposed journeys, the notion that everyone's on a journey and it doesn't matter if you're paying to exploit animals now, because one day you might not. We don't support vegetarianism, and we don't encourage the reduction of the consumption of animal products. We promote absolute veganism and nothing less than that. Because the idea that going vegan is some incredibly difficult thing that few people can actually pull off is totally unfounded. We've all gone vegan, and none of us are really special. Is it Mike?
I think you might accidentally switch it off.
Oh, sorry. No, it's on.
Are you holding it up to your way?
Very.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. There is a spare.
Yeah, maybe it's not necessary.
Are you okay?
We can hear you. Just
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
okay.
Sorry
All
about
right.
that.
I'll take that.
Thanks. Frees up my
Sorry
hands
about
as
that.
well. No, no, it's cool. Yeah, we've all gone vegan. None of us are that special. It isn't actually difficult to go vegan. And encouraging anything less than veganism is encouraging people to continue to pay others to use and kill animals for them. And it's inconsistent and illogical, and it undermines our own credibility. If you take a campaign like Meatless Mondays, for example, which encourages you to not eat animal flesh on a Monday, but you can eat it any other day of the week, and you can fill your plates with dairy and eggs on a Monday, all that you're doing is shifting one form of exploitation over to another, and it fails to address the fundamental issue of animals being viewed as commodities. In response to a clear, simple, go vegan message, some people really will go vegan overnight, and we know some of those people. Others will gradually cut things out over a period of days or weeks or even months, and ultimately that's up to them. But what's important is that we are consistent in saying that going vegan is the right thing to do right now. And we think that this really matters because these mixed messages and lack of clarity has led to so much confusion. We all know people who get stuck at being vegetarian for decades. And we only need to look at someone like Paul McCartney for a very high-profile example of this. Paul McCartney's been vegetarian for over 40 years. And how can someone be that vocal about their vegetarianism and not feel any moral pressure to go vegan? And how can he continue to be associated with a business that makes products using dairy? It's precisely because a consistent message has never been propagated. Veganism needs to be promoted as a moral baseline, and none of the large animal charities do that. We don't support single-issue campaigns. These are campaigns that focus on particular uses of animals or on a particular species of animal. The most notable of these is definitely the anti-fur campaign, which has existed for a few decades and, in our view, been unequivocally unsuccessful, seeing as now the fur industry is bigger than it ever has been before. Some of you might remember this campaign from the 90s, a PETA campaign, I'd rather go naked than wear fur. It held out fur-wearing women as being heinous, hideous, evil, and bitches, which it actually says. So rather than highlighting that what the people were doing was wrong, it held the people themselves up as being evil. And it led to reports of women being attacked, paint being thrown on them, things like that. And it certainly led to an atmosphere where it was considered okay to publicly humiliate people, or some people, mostly fur-wearing women. And the people involved in the campaign would say that it was effective in that people were turned off fur. But if we take a look at this picture, which is just from a couple of years ago, here we have pink one of many often non-vegan celebrities that pose for PETA, it's the exact same campaign with the exact same tagline: I'd rather go naked than wear fur. So why are we seeing PETA running the exact same ad campaign more than 20 years later? It's because it didn't actually work the first time around. People turned away from fur for a bit because it wasn't fashionable, but very soon after that it was fashionable again. And now we know fur is absolutely everywhere. And we believe it's because these types of campaign fail to get to the root of the issue. They do nothing to get across the point that exploiting animals is wrong. Because the people who were turned off fur were still eating animals and exploiting animals. And these campaigns lack any coherent moral message. They pick out one use of animals and they hold that out as being totally reprehensible, while they say nothing else about all other forms of animal use, which are equally wrong. No one talks about leather or wool in the same way that they talk about fur, and it doesn't make any sense not to. So we believe that single-issue campaigns encourage and perpetuate the same disconnect that non-vegans live with every day, which is the idea that some animals matter more than others, particularly animals that seem exotic or conventionally cute. Now, that notion is actually what the vast majority of people already believe, whether they realize it or not. And campaigns like this encourage that way of thinking. Finally, we don't promote welfareism, the legislative regulation of animal exploitation. We believe that as long as animals are considered human property, animal welfare standards can never provide adequate protection for the interests of sentient animals. And it's worth noting that there are actually many instances of supposed welfare reform within animal agriculture actually increasing production efficiency so that production costs can decrease, which one would assume to be an undesirable outcome for animal rights advocates. One notable example of this is legislation which requires larger animals to be stunned before they're transported to the killing floor. Now, this ostensibly protects the interests that animals have at the moment of slaughter, but it does so only because it is economically beneficial for producers and consumers, because large animals that are thrashing around as they're slaughtered are likely to cause injuries to slaughterhouse workers, as well as carcass damage to themselves. So stunning them makes good economic sense. And this isn't even taking into consideration how inconsistent and ineffectual we know that stunning can be, and how just because an animal can no longer resist doesn't mean that they can no longer feel. We also take it to be demonstrably true that as long as animals are commodified by human beings, their suffering is completely inevitable, precisely because the industries in which they are used require them to be considered utilities rather than the feeling sentient beings that we know that they are. And investigation after investigation shows that labels such as cage-free or free-range or humane are all but arbitrary. So, in our view, campaigning for welfare reforms within animal agriculture actually hinders the progression of animal rights, because it does not explicitly place the abolition of animal exploitation as its primary objective, and it merely assists people in believing that there actually can be a moral justification for exploiting animals. So how do we apply all of this on our stalls, which is our main form of advocacy? They're deliberately set up so that people approach us. We don't go out into the street approaching people. People can see our vegan information banners, and it's clear why we're there, which means that when people approach us, they have a much more open mind and they're curious, and they're coming over for information. It's a huge variety of people who approach the stall, really people of all ages, who are generally friendly and willing to listen. We find that speaking to people on the street is a complete paradigm shift from speaking to people online. Because when you're talking to someone face to face, you have the benefit of eye contact and body language, and they can see that you're friendly and you're not making any kind of damning judgments of them. We do sometimes have difficult conversations on the stall. We've had people that genuinely get very upset, but a good thing about the way the stall is set up is that we're all there to offer support. And another positive thing is that we're there to tell people the truth, but we're also there to offer them the solution. I should mention that we do have footage that we use on our stalls, but it's never used as an opening gambit when we're speaking to a member of the public. Because we find that, generally speaking, people grasp that there are moral issues with animal use quite quickly, and they probably already empathise with animals to a certain extent. But if someone maybe isn't receptive to a moral argument and they seem basically apathetic, we have this video called How We Use Animals. You can find it and watch it yourself on our YouTube channel. It exclusively features footage of standard industry practices in the UK. There's no gratuitous beating or anything that could potentially be held up as being atypical of animal agriculture in this country. Also, the footage is all from the past 7 years, and it's clearly subtitled with extra information, as well as the locations where each bit of footage is from. So, to briefly mention things that you can do to help if you're interested, you can obviously come volunteer on our stalls. You can get in touch on our Facebook page if you're interested in doing that. You can also get in touch if you're interested in setting up a stall in your own area. We've recently done pop-ups in loads of places like Skye, Perth, Dumfries. We had one here in Dundee. So we're really up for travelling in Scotland. You can share our resources, our leaflets, our posts on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You can help us grow the information on our own website and social media pages. We're mostly located in the Central Belt, so we don't necessarily know what's happening in other areas of Scotland. And finally, we do take donations which are solely used to fund our advocacy. We have various costs for things like printing, insurance, stall fees, stall equipment, and petrol for our new van, which we use for our pop-up stalls. And just to stress again, that we have no salaries, no expense budgets. We each pay our own individual travel, and we chip in towards costs whenever we can.
To come back to what somebody had mentioned before, I'm going to move on to the second part of the talk now and just talk a little bit about vegan rights and how you can use vegan rights in your advocacy. So I think it's important because when we're out there advocating for better provision for vegans, which obviously makes life easier for us, makes life easier for our families, but perhaps more importantly for people coming behind us who we're telling to go vegan. You know, the easier we can make it for them, the better. And you can use vegan rights in your advocacy, in those sorts of negotiation situations. And I'm saying we, because I'm assuming everyone here is already vegan, because this is a vegan festival. But if you're not, then please do go vegan, because it is a matter of justice. It's a matter of justice for non-human animals. And as Patrick said, we can all do it, and we're here to help you. We've got a Go Vegan Scotland stall. We're all volunteers. We've come up here for that purpose. Come to the stall after the talk. Tell us what's holding you back, what's standing in your way, and we'll do our best to help you. So vegans have rights under international human rights law, under European law, and under the UK law. And why are we talking about that firstly? Why, when we're here to try and help non-human animals, are we going back to talk about humans? Is that not once again making it all about us and redirecting that focus away from the non-human animals? Well, I think there is a risk in that, and I think we need to be careful that we don't do that. So when we are using these rights that we have, I think we should be very consistent and clear. The reason we have these rights is because veganism is not a diet. It's because veganism is a moral conviction that's very important to us. And when you keep bringing it back to that veganism is the moral conviction that it's wrong to use and kill non-human animals, then you keep the focus on the persons that should be the focus, the non-human animals. So I've set out a bit more detail on the slide. Exploiting and killing non-human animals, it's only going to end when we, as a society, stop demanding it. It only happens because we demand it. And that's why we don't go out and protest against businesses or against farmers, but we speak to individuals about their consumption. When we stop, it will stop. And veganism is the rejection of that exploitation and that killing. It's our refusal to support it and participate in it. And it's our way of living in recognition of the rights of animals. So by protecting vegans and by ensuring that we're able to live according to that conviction, we're helping vegans, we're helping veganism, we're helping veganism grow, but most importantly, ultimately, we're helping non-human animals because it's the way we live in recognition of their rights. They can be very powerful tools, potentially, for vegan advocates because by referring to vegan rights, we can really assist in our negotiations with public institutions and with employers, with hospitals and schools and so on. And each one of those conversations is a really good opportunity to talk to people about veganism in a way that you might not really get the chance to do in other contexts. It's a chance to say to them, look, I'm asking you to provide for me, and I'm not doing that because I'm on a fad diet. I'm not doing that because I've chosen to live in a restrictive way. I'm doing that because I have a moral conviction, and I'm asking you to respect that, and it's my right that you do respect that. So it's a perfect opportunity for raising awareness about what veganism really is. And that's why I've put one of our restaurant cards there, because I think it's important that when we're out there doing that sort of promotion, when we're out with our friends, when we're eating in non-vegan places and we're saying, thank you for having vegan options, I think it's important that we don't just say that, because that could mean, thanks for having plant-based options, I'm following a plant-based diet and it was great that you had options. That's not what we're saying. We're saying to them, I'm vegan and I have a moral conviction that it's wrong to use animals, and so I need there to be non-animal products, and you have those options, and so I'm thanking you. And that's why we say on it, stop the demand, end the violence, because we want the waiter, the waitress, we want the cafe owner to read that card and to think to themselves, hang on, what do they mean? I think of veganism as a diet. What's this violence all about? And then hopefully they go to our website and they learn a bit more about it, as well as providing better provision. So rights issues for vegans generally arise when we're dependent on others, because when we have control over our day-to-day lives, we're generally able to make choices that are vegan. And taking again account of what was said previously by the question, we do recognise that people are in individual circumstances, and our stalls are about as accessible as it gets. You know, we're out on the street where anyone can approach us, and so we're not just making ourselves available to any one particular community. And we get a whole range of different ages and life experiences of people coming to the stalls. We recognise that people have different situations that they're dealing with, and we try and account for that in our conversations with them. But some people are dependent on others. So for example, if you're living with a disability, you might be generally depending on others. If you're a child, you're relying on your parents. When we are in hospitals as patients, we rely on them. Even when we're outpatients of the NHS, we rely on them to some extent to provide us with medications. Pupils in schools, if we're inmates in a prison, if we're applying for state benefits, or increasingly if we're dependent on food banks, and as employees, to some extent, we're dependent on others. And we Go Vegan Scotland ran a survey, I think it was earlier this year, the end of last year, to find out what kind of issues vegans in Scotland are experiencing still. And the results showed that it's still very, very patchy. So it's kind of a lottery which hospital you end up going into. Some of them have full vegan menus, which is impressive, and others don't even know what vegan actually means and will literally say, no, we have nothing, we can't provide for you. To the extent that there was one respondent who had been in hospital for either 3 or 4 days and just wasn't able to eat, and she was very ill, and that was the position that she was put in. It's the same in schools. It's again very patchy. Some provide well, some don't, and oftentimes it will depend if there was a vegan in that school in previous years and maybe their family did a bit of work to make sure that they were catered for. It can arise in various situations in employment contexts. So for example, the employer might say you have to wear this safety equipment or these boots, and they're made from animal skin, and that's just their standard issue, take them or leave them, or you must take them in fact because it's health and safety. Or you might be asked to participate in a milk run where you're asked to spend your own money buying milk that's been taken from cows, even although that's against your convictions. And we even know of a situation where somebody was applying for employment benefit and was told that they had to apply for a job in a slaughterhouse, even although they were vegan, and that was clearly against their convictions. And these things clearly shouldn't be happening. And they wouldn't be happening if you were to put the situation into a religious context, because there's a general awareness in the UK that you can't treat people with religious beliefs in that way. But what we don't have at the moment is a general awareness that veganism stands on the same footing. So we have, the main right that we have is freedom of thought, conscience and belief. And again, that's under international human rights, European human rights, and UK law. So you have a complete right to believe whatever you like. Nobody can interfere with your thoughts or try and control them. So for example, you could believe in murder, for, let's say, even although murder is unlawful. But you only have the right to manifest your belief if it's protected. So you only have the right to act out in accordance with what you believe if your belief is protected. And beliefs are only protected if they have this level of cogency, or they're clear and logical and convincing, serious and important. So murder would not be protected. So you don't have the right to act out murder. But veganism is protected. So we have the right to live in accordance with our beliefs. And the way we live in accordance with our conviction that it's wrong to use and kill unnecessarily non-human animals is generally by avoiding participating in that or consuming animal products. So the government has an obligation to ensure that we are able to live by that conviction. And that applies to all state entities: hospitals, schools, prisons, care homes, Parliament itself, local authorities, councils. It also extends to some extent beyond state entities, because the government has an obligation to ensure and has to pass any laws that are necessary to make that happen. So even beyond the state context. And the only limits that they can put on our right to act in accordance with our beliefs is if they set those limits down in law, and they're laws that are necessary to protect public health, safety, order, or the fundamental freedoms of others. So they've got to be able to justify it. If they're going to restrict our ability to live in accordance with our beliefs, they have to be able to justify it. And it also has to be proportionate. It's to go no further than is necessary to achieve that aim. So to put that into context, if we take an example, you've got a patient in hospital who's vegan and they're reliant on hospital food while they're staying there. And if the hospital doesn't provide food that's suitable for vegans, then they're not able to live according to their conviction while they're staying there. So a vegan in that position would have a potential claim under this human right. And if it went before a court would say, well, yes, you have that right, but we've got to balance that with everyone else's rights. Let's look at what it is that the state is trying to achieve by providing food for everyone. And we'll give them some leeway because they're the state, so we'll assume that they know best how to balance these things out. And then we'll decide whether or not there's been a breach. And a case like that went to the European Court of Human Rights, where there was a Polish prisoner and the Polish government had not provided vegan food. And he said, well, you're breaching my rights. And the Polish government said, well, we appreciate you have these rights, but on balance, it would be too burdensome for us to provide vegan food. So we've got to provide food for everyone, it's got to be cost effective and so on. And the European Court of Human Rights said, no, it would not be too burdensome for you to provide vegan food, and so you must do that. So that's an example of how that would play out. And similarly, it'd be difficult, I think, for any UK prison, hospital, school, care home, or local authority to really justify refusing to provide vegan food on the basis that it would be too burdensome, particularly because there are so many who are doing it and are doing it well. And because vegan food could be said to be inclusive, because generally everyone can eat it, and it doesn't cause problems in terms of other food restrictions. And the same approach could be taken for non-food items, such as employer work safety clothing. So the other thing to note is that the government has an obligation to ensure this right to live according to your beliefs without distinction. So that means that to the extent that they protect religious beliefs, they need to also extend that same protection to vegan beliefs. So to the extent that a state entity is catering for religious food needs, they should be providing for vegans to the same extent, and that can be quite useful in specific contexts where you're negotiating with someone. Another right that I think is really important that hasn't really been used at all is the right of parents to have respect for their philosophical convictions by state educators. So this applies not only to the core education process, but to every function in the sphere of education, including ancillary functions. So for example, you might remember, quite a long time ago now, there was a Scottish couple who took a claim to the European Court of Human Rights on the basis that corporal punishment, using physical violence against their children in school, was a breach of their philosophical convictions that you shouldn't be violent to children. That was under this right. And the European Court of Human Rights said, yeah, we agree. Your philosophical conviction that it's wrong to inflict violence on children is protected, and the state is in breach. And that led to the outlawing of corporal punishment in state schools in the UK. Now, in the same way, the vegan philosophical conviction that it's wrong to use and kill non-human animals is protected. And so vegan parents have that protection, and their children should not be educated in a way that is in breach of that. And that's, I think, something to keep in mind for situations like dairy farmers being invited into school to talk to kids and to promote dairy and tell them that this is what we should all be doing. Representation of animals as things in our textbooks, using animals in class, and some of the school trips that they tend to take kids on. All of these things, I would say, are open to challenge. So that's our human right to freedom of conscience and belief. Now, separately and in addition to that, we've got the right to equality and freedom from discrimination. This means that the government must prohibit discrimination based on philosophical beliefs. And the UK government's accepted, again, that veganism is a philosophical belief. And this applies to the public or government bodies that we mentioned before, the hospitals and schools and prisons and so on. But importantly, it extends beyond that, and it applies to all employers, whether state or private. And it applies to all private service providers. So it includes restaurants, hotels and bars, private housing associations and so on. So what's prohibited? Firstly, direct discrimination, which means when a vegan is treated less favourably because they're vegan. So for example, a job advert which says vegans should not apply. And this surprisingly happened a few months ago. It's very rare to see direct discrimination like this, but there was an NHS trust in London, and they were advertising for an occupational therapist to help with people with anorexia, and they said vegans need not apply. And when you looked at the more detailed description, they said this position is not suitable to a restrictive diet, which comes back to my original point that a lot of these issues arise because of a misunderstanding about what veganism is. And so when they were challenged by people who pointed out veganism is not a restrictive diet, it's a fundamental conviction, The situation, I think, was that the therapy was to involve sitting down with the patient and eating high-fat, high-risk meals, as they were seen as, and the idea being that a vegan couldn't do that. But of course, as we know, there's a vegan version of everything, and you can be a vegan junk food person as well as you can be a whole food-based person. So they would not have been able to justify that, and they changed their advert pretty quickly when it was challenged. Indirect discrimination is where you have a neutral policy that applies to everyone, but the way it impacts on vegans, it discriminates against them, it disadvantages them because they're vegan. So for example, if an employer was to provide free food for everyone, but they didn't include an option that was suitable for vegans, that wouldn't be directly discriminating the vegan. They haven't singled them out and said, because you're vegan, we treat you differently. But their neutral policy has impacted on the vegan because of their beliefs. So that's indirect discrimination. Harassment is where a vegan endures unwanted conduct related to their beliefs, like an intimidating or hostile or humiliating environment, basically being picked on or bullied because of your veganism. And victimization, and what I should say about harassment actually is, it's not the intention of the person doing it that matters, it's how the person is made to feel that matters. Victimization is where the vegan who's being bullied goes to the employer and says, this is going on, you need to help me stop this, and they're victimized as a consequence. They're treated badly because of doing that. There are a couple of exceptions. So for direct discrimination, it is permissible to say vegans need not apply if there's a genuine occupational requirement. And again, go back to that NHS situation, they couldn't have shown that because there just wasn't. And it's very difficult to think of a job where being non-vegan is genuinely a requirement of the job. It's easy to think of some jobs that vegans would not want to do, but that's different to saying you need not apply. Indirect discrimination is permissible if the neutral policy is justified by the legitimate aim. So, we've got to feed everyone and we only have this budget. But you have to also show that the means of achieving the aim are proportionate and necessary. So this comes back to that idea we talked about earlier of, is it unduly burdensome for them to accommodate the vegan requirements? So there was another case that went to the European Court of Human Rights where there was a prisoner who had to work in a print shop as part of the prison rota of work. And he said, this is discriminatory against me because I'm vegan, the inks are not suitable for vegans, and so I don't want to work in the print room. And his case failed for a number of reasons, but on one of the grounds was that this was a neutral policy with a legitimate aim. The prison was trying to keep everyone occupied, and whatever other reasons that they gave for having this work rota, and everyone just needed to get involved. But I think there were other issues with that case that meant it went against him. The impact of using inks is very different to the impact of not having food provided for you. And it wasn't clear that the inks weren't vegan, and it wasn't clear that he was vegan. So there were a lot of issues with that case. Public sector duty, something else to bear in mind is when you're negotiating with government bodies again, they have the duty not only to not discriminate, but they have a positive duty to eliminate discrimination. They have to try and advance equal opportunity. So whenever they're looking at their policies and setting policies, put them in place, they need to be thinking about that. What can we do to remove disadvantage that's currently suffered by vegans? What steps can we take to meet their needs? So it's important to keep that in mind as well. So what can you do with all this? Well, we would very much advocate self-help, primarily because there are thousands and thousands of us, and we can each be out there making these arguments and having these negotiations and trying to improve things for people. And also because there's very little in the way of support in these areas at the moment. And I've put citizens' advice on there, but I doubt that they will know about these rights, frankly. The International Vegan Rights Alliance is an alliance of lawyers around the world who are vegan and who are working on these issues. And I'm a representative along with Jeanette Rowley, but there's a limit to what we can do. I mean, that's another volunteer role that I have in addition to this one, and I have a full-time job. So there's a real limit to what we're able to do. And then there's the Vegan Society, which does do some advocacy work, but again, there's a limit there. So I think what we firstly need to be doing is trying to help ourselves. So when you encounter one of these situations, I would say, don't escalate it immediately if that's avoidable. try and deal with it constructively at first, at least. Use it as an opportunity to educate. First of all, make sure they understand what veganism is and what the situation is that you're having to deal with, and then try and work with them to resolve that. So demonstrate to them that it's not unduly burdensome for them. Go do the research, post into the Facebook groups and find that non-animal skin boot that could be used as an equivalent for the health and safety boot, and take it to them and say, look, it's here. You know, it's a case of ordering. Okay, you might order them in bulk and this is a one-off purchase, but it's not that hard. If they say to you, well, it's way more expensive, you might say, well, I'm prepared to pay the difference. You know, there's compromises that you can come to there, and a lot can be done. And the other thing to say is that I'm writing a book about this at the moment with Jeanette Rowley, and I'm hopeful that it'll come out in the next few months, and it will have in it template letters. It will be free, and there will be template letters in it that you'll be able to use when you're in these situations. So if you're having discussions with a school because they're not providing for a vegan child, if you're experiencing discrimination at work, whatever the particular context, we'll have different letters for different situations so that you can just copy and paste into your own email, add your own facts, and the law will all be kind of set out for you. So we'll be posting about that on the Go Vegan Scotland page when that comes out. And I think that's the only other thing to mention, other than that, as I said, if you're not yet vegan, we have a stall outside, and please come and have a chat to us. So if you have any questions, I have no idea what time it is. I think we have 5 minutes for questions. Is there any? Hi.
How did you, this role you're in, how did you start off? How did you get the legal side of veganism?
Well, they're really separate. I mean, I was a solicitor before I was vegan. And, you know, my job is not vegan rights. My job is just, you know, commercial law. But I have a personal interest in this, obviously, with the volunteer work in Go Vegan Scotland, and then I offered to help the Vegan Society on a pro bono basis, and they put me in touch with Jeanette Rowley, and it's all kind of evolved from there. But I think we're realising that there's more and more need for it, because there are particular situations, especially where children are in care, for example, and they're not being supported. Bullying situations. I think kids in school are quite vulnerable, not only with other kids, but with teachers as well, who don't understand it. And we get a lot of referrals at the IBRA, and we're seeing that there's different types of discrimination often overlap. So, you know, somebody experiencing bullying because of their veganism is also being sexually harassed, or, you know, they're often, it's not only one type of discrimination, they often overlap. Any other questions?
Has it become a global issue? Because years ago it happened, and I sometimes hear through global networks that parents sometimes come to clash with social services if they're leading a vegan life.
Yeah.
So there was a case in New Zealand where the children were taken away.
Yeah.
Because the in-laws didn't agree with the diet of the family.
I think that's still happening in some places, although I would be cautious because I think there's a lot of misreporting. And a few months ago there were a couple of cases that were really prominent in the news from Italy, and the headlines were, you know, vegan baby starving, is taken away from his parents. And when you looked at the story in more detail, they were not vegan as a family, and the baby was not being fed vegan. He was not being fed properly, and I think plant milk was involved for some reason, but it wasn't veganism. So, but yeah, I am aware of cases, even in the UK, where, not necessarily where children are taken away because of it, but where the family is not supported in it, and there's a broader context to it, and the veganism doesn't help. Yeah.
As veganism starts to increase, is there a smear campaign coming from dairy and meat industry? Is that, you seeing more of that?
Yeah, well, at the moment we're seeing it a lot in in Ireland and in the UK. In Ireland, it's the Real Natural campaign, where it's an ad campaign. I don't know if you've seen this. One of their adverts is on billboards, and it says, if you're looking for a plant-based option, just look in your fridge. And so they're representing cow's milk as plant milk. It's a very strange one. It's almost as if they're trying to benefit from the good connotations with plant-based, but at the same time, in other ads, they're kind of undermining vegans, and they have a bunch of adverts. They've come out publicly and said their marketing person, we're targeting young women because they're mainly the ones who are going away from cow's milk. So we're going to specifically target them, and the way we're going to do that is by running these ads that are kind of appealing to them, where there's young girls doing yoga, and there's a young girl who's about maybe 8 who's she's the interviewer kind of thing in the picture. So you've got this older girl who's ordering a latte, she's ordering a plant milk latte, and the young girl is saying to her, you know, what's that all about? Have you checked how many ingredients there are in there? And so she looks at it and she's like, oh, 12. Oh no, I'll just have a normal latte. You know, it's all this sort of stuff. So I think they're getting quite smart with it. I mean, I think that's a smart campaign. It's a horrible campaign, but I think it's quite right to, you know, that is the area, the age range. I mean, people are going vegan at all ranges, but I think that in that particular age range, you're seeing it a lot. But the problem, I think, one of the problems, going back to what Patrick was saying earlier, is that a lot of people who call themselves vegan are not vegan, and they are eating plant-based, and they're doing that for health or for whatever other reason. And if a campaign like that undermines their confidence in the health aspect, then they may easily give it up. And a lot of the YouTubers, for example, who are out there peddling it on a health basis, peddling plant-based, and their understanding of nutrition is limited, or you know, they really don't have the backup. When people who've gone to it for that reason and for following those types of people start to question their credibility, then you could really see a change. And that's another reason I think this is a horrible campaign, but it makes sense. And then there's a UK campaign that is the Ministry of Dairy and Wholesome Related something. I mean, they've got an insignia, you know, like the government insignia, and this is there. They've got a YouTube campaign, it's all over Facebook, and so the dairy industry said a few months ago we're going to spend, can't remember how many millions on this, and they're starting to do it, and it'll run through next year. So yeah, I think we better finish up because the next talk is coming on.